Are you consuming dozens of motivational videos, reading thousands of pages of self-help books, but your real life hasn't moved an inch? We delude ourselves into thinking that acquiring knowledge is progress, but in reality, it's just a very sophisticated way of avoiding action. If you're overwhelmed by advice and feel lost amidst countless philosophies, this story will show you how to rediscover yourself. Stay with me until the end of the video. There is a quiet kind of satisfaction in learning how life should be lived without actually living it. It feels productive to sit with powerful ideas, to highlight them, to remember them, and to believe that by holding them close, something inside us has already changed. For a moment, the mind relaxes because it can point to all this effort and say, "I am moving forward." But beneath that surface, something doesn't feel right, and it's subtle enough that we try to ignore it. Because real change has weight, and weight is uncomfortable. It asks for friction, for risk, for stepping into something uncertain, while learning asks for nothing but attention. So the mind slowly begins to prefer knowing over doing, understanding over experiencing, preparation over action. And without realizing it, we start building a life that looks like progress from the outside, but feels strangely still on the inside. And then comes the moment most people avoid looking at directly. The quiet question that appears when everything is finally still. If all this knowledge is working, why does nothing in my life actually feel different? Why do the same habits return, the same delays repeat, the same version of me keep showing up tomorrow? It's not a loud realization, but it's an honest one, and honesty has a way of cutting through everything we pretend not to see. Somewhere deep inside, there is a part of you that already knows the answer. It knows that information has become a refuge, a safe place where you can feel close to change without ever risking it. And that realization creates a tension that is hard to sit with, because if you stop consuming, you're left alone with yourself, without guidance, without structure, without noise. And that silence feels almost unbearable. But what if that silence is not the problem? What if it's the beginning? In the heart of a vast and restless capital, where scholars gathered like constellations in search of meaning, there lived a young woman named Ilara, whose hunger for wisdom was known by all who crossed her path. She was not careless, nor distracted, nor unwilling to grow. In fact, she possessed a discipline so quiet and persistent that it almost resembled devotion. From the earliest light of morning until the final flicker of candlelight, she remained within the great library, tracing ideas with her eyes as if they were roads she would one day walk. The library itself was a world within walls, filled with scrolls that whispered of distant mountains, hidden treasures, and the many paths a person could take to become whole. Ilara did not simply read them, she studied them, compared them, memorized them, carefully organizing each new piece of knowledge into a growing collection that she believed would one day guide her perfectly. And every time she uncovered a new map, a new philosophy, a new promise of transformation, she felt a quiet surge of certainty, as though she had moved one step closer to the life she was meant to live. But the strange thing was, that step was always imagined, never taken. At times, late into the night, she would pause and look down at her hands, ink-stained and steady, and a faint unease would pass through her chest. She knew the routes of rivers she had never seen, the terrain of mountains she had never climbed, and the dangers of roads she had never walked. Her mind was filled with direction, yet her feet remained untouched by dust. And though she rarely allowed the thought to fully form, something inside her would whisper that perhaps she was not preparing for the journey anymore. Perhaps she was avoiding it. The truth revealed itself in moments so small they were easy to dismiss. A scroll about discipline would leave her inspired, yet when the night grew late, she would remain awake, telling herself that one more page would make tomorrow easier. A passage about courage would stir something deep within her, yet when morning came, she found reasons to stay where she was, convincing herself that she simply needed a clearer plan. And so the pattern continued, not because she lacked intelligence, but because knowledge had become a place where she could feel progress without confronting resistance. How many teachings about discipline can someone absorb and still delay what matters most? The question never stayed long, because there was always another scroll, another insight, another voice ready to take its place. And with each new piece of guidance, her dependence grew quieter, deeper, more convincing, until it no longer felt like dependence at all. It felt like dedication. But beneath that dedication lived a quiet contradiction that refused to disappear. Because no matter how many maps Ilara collected, no matter how precise her understanding became, one truth remained untouched by all her effort. She still had not taken a single step beyond the library doors. And somewhere, far beneath all the knowledge she had gathered, a question continued to wait patiently for her to answer. If you know the way, why are you still standing still? The question stayed with Ilara long after it first appeared, and for the first time, knowledge failed to quiet it. She moved through the library as she always had, her hands tracing familiar scrolls, her eyes scanning familiar words, yet something had shifted beneath the surface. What once felt grounding now felt distant, as if the ideas she held so tightly could no longer reach the place where the discomfort lived. In that growing unease, she heard of a monk who lived beyond the noise of the city, a man known not for giving answers, but for refusing them. Some said he was wise, others said he was pointless, and a few warned that meeting him meant losing the very things you depended on. That was what unsettled her most, because despite everything she had gathered, she could feel how deeply she depended on it. So she went. When Ilara found him, there was nothing remarkable about the place, and nothing impressive about the man. He sat in stillness, his clouded eyes unmoving, as if he had long stopped searching for anything outside himself. And yet, in his presence, she felt something unfamiliar, not inspiration, not clarity, but exposure. She spoke carefully, explaining everything she had learned, everything she had collected, everything she believed she needed. Her words were structured, thoughtful, precise, just as they had always been. And when she finished, she waited for what she had come for, a direction, a correction, a final piece she could carry back with her. But the monk said nothing. The silence stretched longer than she expected, and it unsettled her in a way no contradiction ever had. She tried again, refining her question, offering more detail, searching for the version of her words that would finally earn a response. But there was only stillness, as if her need for answers had nowhere to land. Then, without warning, the monk stood and began gathering the scrolls she had brought. One by one, he removed them from her hands, not with force, but with certainty, until she was left holding nothing at all. A quiet resistance rose within her, sharp and immediate, because without those maps, she felt unprepared, almost defenseless. "You do not need another map," he said. The words landed heavily, not because they were complex, but because they stripped away everything she had been relying on. Her mind rushed to argue, to explain, to justify why she wasn't ready, why understanding must come first. But standing there, empty-handed, a deeper realization surfaced, one she could not escape. She did not know what to do next, and for the first time in her life, there was nothing to reach for. The monk did not replace what he had taken. Instead, he gave her something far more difficult. Stay. There were no teachings, no instructions, no practices to follow, only a day stripped of everything she had used to feel in control. At first, Ilara believed she could endure it, because she had spent years in stillness, disciplined and focused. But she quickly realized something she had never questioned before. She had never truly been still. Her mind had always been filled. At first, the discomfort was subtle, a quiet urge to reach for something, to read, to think, to occupy the empty space. Her thoughts began offering fragments the way they always had, unfinished ideas and remembered teachings that promised to restore a sense of order. It felt almost responsible to follow them. But there was nothing to follow. So the silence deepened. And then it sharpened. What began as restlessness turned into agitation, a tension that moved through her body without direction. She shifted, stood, sat, moved again, not because she needed to, but because stillness now felt unbearable. Her mind once structured and controlled, revealed something else entirely. It was not calm. It was addicted. For years, every scroll, every idea, every piece of knowledge had given her something to process, something to hold on to, something to avoid the unstructured space within herself. And now, with nothing left to consume, that space stood exposed, raw, chaotic, and demanding to be faced. This is where most people leave. Because the moment silence becomes uncomfortable, the instinct is to escape it, to fill it, to reach for anything that restores familiarity. The mind calls it curiosity, growth, even discipline, but often it is avoidance in a more convincing form. But Ilara had nowhere to go, so she stayed, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to change. Not because she found answers, but because the urgency of her thoughts began to lose strength. The noise softened, the tension loosened, and what once felt overwhelming started to clear. Not completely, but enough for something else to emerge. Space. It was unfamiliar, almost fragile, but it was real. And within that space, for the first time, Ilara was no longer reacting to what she consumed, no longer chasing the next idea, no longer filling every moment with borrowed direction. She was listening. And in that quiet, something within her began to speak, not loudly, not clearly, but honestly. For the first time, it was not coming from the outside. It was coming from her. At first, what Ilara heard in that silence was not clarity, but something far more fragile, something uncertain, almost easy to dismiss. It did not sound like the voices she had studied, strong and structured and complete. It came in fragments, in quiet nudges, in feelings she could not immediately explain. And for a moment she doubted it, because it lacked the authority she had spent her life trusting. But the longer she stayed, the more she began to recognize it. It was her own voice, not the voice shaped by teachings, not the voice repeating borrowed wisdom, but something older, quieter, and strangely familiar. It did not tell her everything at once, nor did it offer a perfect path. It simply pointed gently, patiently, toward something she had avoided for far too long. Not a grand destination, not a distant treasure, but a single, simple direction. Step outside. The thought felt almost disappointingly small compared to everything she had studied. After all the maps, all the philosophies, all the years of preparation, could it really be that simple? Her mind tried to complicate it, to question it, to search for a deeper meaning hidden beneath it. But there was nothing hidden. That was the truth she had been resisting. The next step in her life had never been complex, only uncomfortable. So she stood. There was no ceremony, no moment of perfect confidence, no final piece of knowledge that made her feel ready. There was only a quiet decision, made without certainty, but without avoidance. And as she walked toward the edge of the place that had once defined her entire world, she felt something she had not felt in years. Not clarity, not control, but movement. For the first time, the maps were behind her, and the road was real. She stepped outside. The air felt different, not because it had changed, but because she had. There was no immediate transformation, no sudden mastery, no proof that she would succeed. But there was something more important than all of that. A beginning that was no longer imagined. And in that beginning she understood something that no scroll had ever been able to give her. You don't find the path by studying it. You find it by walking. My friend, this story is about you. There is a part of you that already knows what your first step is, and it is probably far simpler than you want it to be. But instead of taking it, you've been preparing for it, researching it, thinking about it, surrounding yourself with ideas that feel like progress, while quietly delaying the moment that actually matters. And the longer you stay in that cycle, the harder it becomes to hear what you truly want, because your mind is constantly filled with what others say you should want. So here are the 3 rules Ilara discovered, not from a book, but from experience. First, stop inputting so you can start digesting, because if you never create space, nothing you consume will ever become yours. Second, for every hour you spend consuming, give yourself an hour to create, to act, to move, even imperfectly. Because action is what turns knowledge into something real. And third, give yourself a day without noise. No guidance, no new information, no distractions, just you, your thoughts, and whatever rises when there is nothing left to reach for. It will feel uncomfortable. That's the point. Because on the other side of that discomfort is something most people never stay long enough to hear: themselves. If this story meant something to you, write in the comments what your first step is, the one you've been avoiding but already know. This is where change begins. Share this with someone who feels stuck in their own mind, someone who keeps searching but hasn't started walking yet. I'll see you in the next story.